Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Kennedy's Brain, a novel, by Henning Mankell, narrated by Anna Bentinck.
Part 1. Christ's Cul-de-sac. Defeats should be out in the open. They shouldn't be hidden away, for it is defeats that make one a human being. A man who never understands his defeats takes nothing with him into the future. Askel Sondermus. Chapter 1. The catastrophe happened in the autumn. She had no idea what was coming, no warning. No shadow was cast, it struck without a sound. It was like being waylaid in a dark alley. But the fact was that it forced her away from her ruins, into a reality that she had never really concerned herself with. She was hurled with immense force into a world where the excavation of Greek Bronze Age graves was irrelevant. She had been living deep down in her dusty trenches, or hunched over shattered vases that she was trying to piece together. She had loved her ruins, and failed to notice that the world around her was starting to collapse. She was an archaeologist, forced to leave the past and stand next to a grave she had never imagined possible. There were no portents. The tragedy had been robbed of its voice. It was unable to shout out a warning to her. The evening before Louise Cantor travelled to Sweden to take part in a conference on current archaeological excavations of Bronze Age graves, she stood on a ceramic fragment in the bathroom and suffered a deep wound in her left foot. It bled copiously over the floor, making her feel sick. The shard dated from the 5th century BC. She was in Argolis, on Peloponnesus, 137 kilometres outside Athens. It was September, and the year's excavations were coming to a close. She could already feel a chill in the wind that presaged the coming winter. The dry heat with its scent of rosemary and thyme was beginning to fade. She stemmed the flow of blood and applied a plaster. A memory came storming into her mind. A rusty nail that had gone right through her foot. Not the one she had cut now, but the other one, her right foot. She must have been 5 or 6 years old. The brown nail had penetrated her heel, forced its way through skin and flesh, and impaled her as if on a pole. She had howled with pain, and thought that she was undergoing the same kind of torture experienced by the man crucified on the cross at the front of the church where she sometimes played her lonely horror games. We are pierced over and over again by these barbs, she thought as she wiped the blood off the cracked floor tiles. A woman spends all her life in the proximity of these sharp edges, out to penetrate what she is trying to protect. She limped to the part of the house that doubled as her workplace and bedroom. In one corner was a creaky rocking chair and a CD player. She had been given the CD player by old Leandros, the caretaker. Leandros had been around as a poverty-stricken but curious child when the Swedish excavations at Argolis began in the 1930s. Nowadays, he spent his nights fast asleep while on caretaking duty at the Mastos Hill. But everybody on the project supported him. Leandros was an essential cog in the wheel. Without him, all future grants to enable the continuation of the excavations would be under threat. Exercising the prerogative of old age, Leandros had become a toothless and often noticeably filthy guardian angel. Louise Cantor sat down on the rocking chair and examined her wounded foot. She smiled at the thought of Leandros. Most Swedish archaeologists she knew were aggressively impious and refused to accept various authorities as anything other than obstacles in the way of the continued dig. A few gods, who had lost all significance a very long time ago, could hardly affect the distant Swedish authorities when it came to approving or rejecting expenditure on archaeological ventures. Swedish bureaucracy was a sort of tunnel world, with entrances and exits, but nothing in between, and the decisions that eventually found their way to the sweltering Greek burial vaults were often extremely difficult to understand. An archaeologist always needs to be doubly blessed, she thought. We never know if we're going to find what we're looking for, or if we're looking for what we want to find. If we get it right, we are greatly blessed. But at the same time, we never know if we are going to be given permission and sufficient money to dig deeper into the marvellous ruined worlds, or if the milch cow's udders will suddenly dry up. This was Louise's contribution to archaeological jargon, to describe the funding authorities as milch cows with capricious udders. She looked at the clock. It was 8:15, an hour earlier in Sweden. She reached for the telephone and dialed the number of her son in Stockholm. She could hear the ringing, but nobody answered. When the answering machine cut in, she listened to his voice with her eyes closed. It was a voice that calmed her down. Det här är en telefonsvarare, och du vet vad du ska göra. I'll repeat that in English. This is an answering machine, and you know what to do, Henrik. She left her message. Don't forget that I'm coming home. I shall be in Visby for 2 days, discussing the Bronze Age. Then I'll go to Stockholm. I love you. See you soon. I might ring you later. If not, I'll be in touch from Visby. She fetched the ceramic fragment that had injured her foot. One of her closest colleagues, a very keen female student from Lund, had found it. It was a shard like millions of others, a piece of attic pottery that she guessed came from a pot or jar made just before the colour red started to dominate. She enjoyed piecing together ceramic fragments, imagining the original object that she would probably be unable to reconstruct. She would give this one to Henrik as a present. She put it on top of her packed suitcase that was waiting for the lid to be closed. As usual, she was feeling restless before leaving. She was finding it hard to curb her increasing impatience and decided to change her plans for the evening. Until she had cut her foot, she had intended to spend a few hours on the paper she was writing about attic pottery. Instead, she turned off her desk lamp, switched on the CD player, and sank back in the rocking chair. As usual, when she was listening to music, the dogs started barking in the darkness outside. They belonged to her nearest neighbour, Mitsos, who was part owner of an excavator. He was also the owner of the little house she rented. Most of her colleagues lived in Argolis, but she had preferred to stay close to the dig. She had almost dozed off when she sat up with a start. It had struck her that she did not want to spend the night on her own. She turned down the volume and phoned Vasilis. He had promised to take her to the airport in Athens the next morning. As the Lufthansa flight to Frankfurt left very early, they would need to set off at 5 o'clock. She'd rather have company, when she knew she would not be able to sleep soundly anyway. She looked at the clock and realised that Vasilis was probably still at the office. One of their rare quarrels had concerned his job. She thought she'd been a bit insensitive in saying that the accounting profession must be the most combustible in existence. She could still recall her exact words, which sounded much nastier than she'd intended. The most combustible profession there is, so dry and lifeless that it could burst into flames at any minute. He had been surprised, perhaps saddened, but most of all angry. At that moment, it dawned on her there was more to their relationship than just sex. She enjoyed his company, despite the fact, or because of it, that he had no interest whatsoever in archaeology. She had been afraid that he would be so offended that he would break off their affair on the spot. But she had managed to convince him that she was only joking. "The world is driven by cash books," she said. "Cash books are the liturgy of our time, and accountants are our high priests." Louise dialed the number. Engaged. She rocked gently back and forth in the chair.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?